Joe, I want to start out with a piece by Reuters. And in this piece, they conducted interviews with more than a dozen people, including executives and former prosecutors in the Ukraine. And one of the paragraphs towards the end of the story says this: Alexander Onyshenko, a businessman and former member of the Ukrainian parliament who knows the Burisma founder, Mykola Zolochevsky, said that it had been Zolochevsky's idea to appoint Hunter Biden as a director. Quote, it was to protect the company at a time when it was facing investigations. What a way to make it. I mean, here it is right here by Reuters that totally blows up the entire Biden narrative of, oh, it was because the prosecutor was corrupt. That's why we had to get rid of him.
Well, I think one of the things about the Biden-Burisma connection is that it's going to get worse. There are all sorts of stories floating around about not only what you just saw reported in Reuters, but also the roles of other people that were involved. So it's just a matter of time before this actually explodes. It just shows how stupid it was for these folks to go after the president for his perfectly proper and innocent phone call with current President Zelensky. I think the more interesting thing, this thing about the former head of Burisma saying that they actually went after Hunter Biden in order to get protection. This was the equivalent of an insurance policy. The testimony of George Kent last week, the secret testimony before the phony impeachment inquiry, actually backfired. We now know that George Kent, a career Foreign Service officer, he's now the Assistant Secretary for Eastern Affairs, Near Eastern Affairs. He was in the mission over there in Ukraine. And he actually testified that in 2015, he had gone and warned Vice President Biden's staff that Hunter Biden's connection with Burisma was a disaster, that they needed to get rid of, he needed to get off the board, he needed to get out of his entanglement, and he was rebuffed by Vice President Biden's staff. The evidence is simply mounting that this activity by the Biden family, not just Hunter Biden, but his father, was clearly not only an apparent conflict of interest, but a real conflict of interest. And I think the vice president's behavior in ignoring the warning from George Kent is the beginning of a new chapter in Joe Biden's demise as a candidate. He's not going to be able to survive this because, as I said earlier, this is going to get worse.
It's interesting that you mentioned George Kent because what you just referenced is, of course, deeply newsworthy, but not always treated that way by our press. In fact, the George Kent testimony, as you laugh about that, that's funny. The George Kent testimony has been construed as highly damaging for President Trump, and I'll tell you why the Politico's saying that. Kent told House impeachment investigators that he was, quote, alarmed at the role Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal attorney, was playing in Ukraine. So the way the press is treating the Kent testimony, Joe diGenova, is, well, he expressed concern about Rudy Giuliani. That's the important detail here when you, in fact, shared something actually newsworthy.
Well, you have to understand, as I know you and Mary do, that there is a narrative here, and the narrative is to neutralize Rudy Giuliani as an effective advocate for the President of the United States. What people don't realize, Rudy was doing what any good lawyer was doing. He was doing, at the request of his client, the President of the United States, an investigation to who was behind the Russia hoax. It was well known for a long period of time, and we now know that John Durham is looking at this, that many of the original players in the effort to create a false narrative about a Trump connection to Russia started in Ukraine with Ukrainian governmental figures who wanted to help Hillary Clinton, because the embassy, the United States Embassy in Ukraine, was a hotbed of Clinton support. They wanted her to win. They were doing everything in the world they could to help her and to hurt Donald Trump. So it isn't surprising, by the way, that as a result of that, President Trump decided that he was going to replace the ambassador there, Marie Yovanovitch. So the attempt to get Rudy now is a way to, now that the barn door is open, to close it and to try and smear Rudy, who did nothing more then work on behalf of his client. Perfectly proper activity overseas. You notice that George Kent didn't say there was anything improper or illegal about what Rudy was doing. He said he was uncomfortable with it. Well, those things happen in foreign policy. The President of the United States made a decision about how he wanted his lawyer to conduct an investigation. And I think both Rudy and the President are to be commended for trying to get to the truth. But it's not surprising that the press would ignore the most important part of George Kent's testimony, which, of course, why it was held in secret, so nobody could hear it unless it was leaked by someone who wanted it to get out.
Now, you mentioned criticism of Rudy Giuliani. I'm going to play some for you from this weekend. Anderson Cooper had Kamala Harris on and she raised the idea that Rudy's been breaking laws. Listen.
Do the investigation into Rudy Giuliani. He has clearly broken many laws. Clearly, for a long time now, we've been talking about bad behaviors coming from this administration and coming from the desk of the President of the United States.
Are there specific laws you believe Giuliani has broken or may have broken?
Well, I don't know. We're going to find out.
We're going to find out, says Kamala Harris. What do you think?
Well, Kamala Harris is behaving just the way she did when she was the Attorney General of California. She's been known from the time she was Attorney General, besides being Willie Brown's paramour, she was known to be a vicious partisan, a political hack who abused the prosecutorial process for her own political ends. She has become an embarrassment on the movement to allow prisoners with minor drug records to become full citizens again. Mm-hmm. She made fun of her own use of marijuana on a radio show when she made a career out of prosecuting small-time marijuana users and putting them in prison. It isn't surprising that she would be as reckless as she was in that interview with Anderson Cooper and accused Rudy Giuliani of violating laws. It is absolutely outrageous, and there is no evidence whatsoever that Rudy Giuliani broke any laws, and the notion that he would do so is just disgusting, but it shows the level to which somebody like that, who is now at the bottom of the polls, is willing to go to do anything. She's just piling on, which is what she did when she was the prosecutor.
Hey, Joe, I've got more questions for you, so stick around. We're going to keep you.
We're here with Joe diGenova, legal analyst, former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, thanks for staying with us. Appreciate it. The State Department has released a report after reviewing about 33,000 of Hillary Clinton's emails, and those were just the ones that they were physically able to review. The rest, as we know, were destroyed. They found a total of 588 security violations. 588 security violations. They found that 38 individuals were responsible for 91 violations. 497 could not be tied to a specific individual because those people have left. They're no longer with the State Department. And the report does not state what, if any, disciplinary action these individuals will face or who is responsible for the violations. But they did send everything over to the Bureau of Human Resources, and they said that if someone has left, there'll be a notice in their permanent file. Can I take any solace with any of this? Will anyone finally be punished for what happened with these emails and classified information?
Well, apparently not. Apparently the matter is over for the State Department and for others. You'll notice there's been no demand from anybody in the department for accountability for any of these people. It's pretty clear that during the reign of Hillary Clinton at the State Department, there was not only a cavalier attitude toward security, proprieties, and laws and rules, but an absolute decision on their part to abuse the process purposely to protect themselves, to hide information, and almost more importantly, to prevent disclosures under the Freedom of Information Act. Just remember, her entire strategy through the use of a homebrew server and through mishandling classified information in the State Department was to prevent the public from knowing what she was doing. And it is pretty obvious now that what she was doing was engaging in pay-to-play. She was using the Clinton Foundation as a place for people to pay bribes and then get official actions by her and her subordinates in the State Department. It isn't even a close call anymore. But whether or not someone is going to do anything about it, we will never know. But we do know this. It was as a result of her abuse of classified information, her home-brewed server, and other things that she did not become president of the United States. And that is quite a punishment for the lady who wakes up every morning having to listen to Donald Trump in the White House.
Yeah, what bothers me is that because we all thought that when President Trump came in, he'd report someone to appoint someone to the DOJ who would restore law and order, and people would be punished if they've done something wrong. Because as you said, we all know what happened here. And you have guys like Christian Saucier who takes some pictures of a sub that he's on, send them to his mother, and he winds up in prison for a year and has his life ruined. But they said that they did their best to implement security procedures. They did their best. That's okay if you're a Democrat, I guess, and in politics. If you're part of the ruling class, it's okay, or if you work for them. But if you're a sailor on a ship, you have your life ruined.
Well, remember what this is. Remember, when Jeff Sessions was appointed Attorney General, that was a huge mistake because he was gutless. He wasn't able to do anything. He didn't want to rock any boats. He certainly did not want to investigate Hillary Clinton or her email scandal once James Comey illegally exonerated her. Now, anyone worth his salt would have gone in there and said that exoneration by Comey was illegal, improper, and we're going to reopen the matter. But he didn't do that. And because of the passage time, and because he had a politically corrupt Deputy Attorney General in Rod Rosenstein, there was never any accountability. Because Rosenstein also didn't want to investigate Hillary Clinton. He was interested in his next job, which is exactly why he spent most of his time while he was there figuring out how to get the President of the United States, Donald Trump, ensnared in some crazy plot to use the 25th Amendment to remove him from office because of incapacity. I mean, when you go back, and this little email story from the State Department really shows you how corrupt the Justice Department was under Trump during the early parts of his first term, how incompetent Jeff Sessions was, and how politically corrupt Rod Rosenstein was. And basically, at that point, Andrew McCabe was running the Department of Justice because he had Rod Rosenstein cowering at the thought of McCabe criticizing him in any way.
Speaking of accountability at the Justice Department, we're still playing a game of rope-a-dope when it comes to the IG report being released. Remember Maria Bartiromo at the top of last week had said by Friday that thing's coming out, and then we heard in subsequent reports that it's still going through declassification. What do you know, if anything, about this?
Well, I'm told the report is the size of a telephone book.
Yeah.
And that as a result of that, the declassification process has been taking an inordinately long period of time. But also, make no mistake about it, careers are at stake here. The conclusions, who the hell knows whether the conclusions are good, bad, or indifferent. I'm assuming they can't be anything but awful, but who the hell knows these days? The world is upside down. I'm assuming people are fighting like crazy to keep stuff out of the public for no other reason than not to embarrass the CIA and the FBI. Remember, the people in charge of both of those institutions right now want to do one thing. They want to protect the institution from a righteous public, which is furious, but it's also very tired of how long this has taken. And it may be that the bureaucrats are doing everything they can to delay this so they can continue to push out the period when revelation occurs. But, I think that's a fool's errand at this point.
Joe, who you're referring to, CIA Director Gina Haspel, FBI Director Christopher Wray, they are standing in the way of public disclosure?
It ain't anybody else.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Joe diGenova, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.